Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Hello, Dad. Good morning, and thanks for having me back on the show. You know, there's so much going on right now, and after last week talking about the sort of the seeds of this great war, funding everyone with weapons, the failure of the United Nations to disarm the world and resolve conflicts without building up militaries to do it, which is what we've been told since the League of Nations 100 years ago was really the goal. That's what was supposed to happen. And then, of course, after World War II, there seemed nothing to stand in the way of it. And then here we are today with, even the Philippines needs weapons from Japan. Australia needs to build weapons. Yemen, everybody's at war and everybody's got all the weapons they need to solve their conflicts or even to create this idea of threats. We're going to talk about North Korea today, Dad. This threat from North Korea, because they want us to. So let's read between their lines on that. So, and there's something else today I think that's important. I don't know when we'll insert it here, but I feel that I put myself through just a little history refresher, and it brought some things to light for me that I think make it a little easier for me to place these things, to read between these lines. So I'm just going to start going for it because I've got a lot of headlines that I think are important, and then we'll see if I can get to this other, inserting a little history into this as a context. But the first one is from March 4th, Business Insider by Alex Locke, U.S. Yes, China, we did send a small armada to the South China Sea. And all this really tells me, Dad, I'm trying to get to the part of this. I don't want to have to read all these articles. But additionally, U.S. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter said on Tuesday that the U.S. is willing to spend $425 million on joint military exercises with nations in the Pacific that feel threatened by China's militarization of the major trade route. And this, of course, people like the Philippines or Japan. The thing to me doesn't this just fly right in the face of what the United Nations is meant to be doing? Why is America willing to spend $500 million on joint military exercises when the United Nations should be able to do, at least apply their pressure first? And that pressure, as I said, from the 40s was absolute pressure. And that's what I want to get to a little today with the history lesson. But of course, China denied militarizing the region and went as far as to blame the U.S. instead, warning that the U.S. has committed a miscalculation of the situation. So, pointing fingers, basically, which, forgive me if that's not what leads to conflict in the world. And again, that was it. I mean, this article's very short. China has created islands with military-grade runways and missile defense hardware on islands claimed by Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei. So they've just been in there building. I mean, how long does it take to build a military-grade runway and install missile defense hardware? You don't just do that over the weekend while everybody's sleeping. You got Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei are all screaming, hey, you can't do that on my island. And China's just saying, screw you. And there's no talk about United Nations. What we do instead, okay, let's send the Philippines some weapons. Make sure Japan's got enough weapons to send some to the Philippines. Let's send our fleet down there. Let's show a capacity for military confrontation. It just doesn't make sense, considering what the narrative has been for the last 60, 70 years with the implementation of the United Nations. But it does make sense if you think about what I pointed out last week, Dad, that perhaps there's someone that's been wanting to start a war at this time from 100 years ago that started the first two world wars and has been funding and putting the pieces in place. Well, then you'd need a lot of weapons at this time, wouldn't you? And that's why we haven't gone the route of the narrative, which we never do, right? Free press means now it's owned by 6 corporations that give us propaganda. Peace process means let's give everybody guns and have more fighting in the world by more disparate nations than we've ever had before. So this is the first thing that's going on. Yeah, we're sending a small armada. Yeah, we're ready to handle this, diplomatically. Next article I have here, Dad. There are cities in Russia that no one is allowed to go. I don't know. This is some article that says News UK on Yahoo. I don't know what kind of rag that, internet rag this is. It says News UK on Yahoo. There are cities in Russia that no one is allowed to go. And I think this is really interesting. First time I'd heard this. Today in Russia, at least 1.5 million people live in cities that no one from the outside world is allowed to visit. Many don't appear on maps. Some have no road signs to indicate where they are. Still more are so cloaked in secrecy that people outside Russia don't even know what they're called. They are Russia's closed cities, a hangover from the Soviet Union, when the then government went to extreme lengths to conceal locations of strategic importance. The clandestine communities housed military bases, weapons factories, and secretive research facilities that those in power wanted to keep hidden from foreign eyes, doing so by denying their existence altogether. Currently, there are still 44 publicly acknowledged closed cities in Russia, and it is suspected that more remain under wraps. Russia's first closed cities were built in the late 1940s, and the Soviet Union had with a number of techniques to keep them out of sight. Funny, huh? Late 1940s, that's after the Second World War, and right a few years before they gave a lot of Eastern Europe to Stalin's control. So, you would think that if Russia was over there doing this to interfere with the balance of power or to threaten the Western powers, it's highly unlikely they'd have gotten away with building so many at the time when the UN was purporting to, take weapons away from the world. The United States was the only superpower. Russia was our friend, right? So they're doing this behind our back, is what we're saying. External communication with citizens wasn't easy. Any post had to be delivered to a classified mailbox in another area where someone in on the secret would then be able to forward it on. And the residents themselves were by no means free to come and go as they pleased. Special permission was required for travel outside the boundaries, and visitors were heavily vetted. Since their peak under the communist government, the number of closed cities has dropped dramatically. Their existence was officially revealed in 1986, and the majority were open to foreign visitors and investors in the late 80s and 90s. Right? It's when they went broke and Western powers took over the Soviet Union. And interesting, there's still 44 of these. I wonder what they're doing in these places. Well, one of them, called Zarchny, probably mispronouncing that, A life in Zarchny can't be compared to one in a big town. People seem to not be so free in their decisions. It was rather visible during the official parade for the anniversary celebration, which most of the workers were forced to partake in. Zarchny, formerly known as Penza 19, is centered around a plant that builds parts for nuclear weapons. Yurkova explained most of the inhabitants work on the plant. The region has its own unique economy and market system, very different compared to the big towns nearby. So, here's a place apparently still going, builds nuclear weapons, secret town. So you're telling me that since this was all opened up in '86, nobody from the UN is aware that there's these, that's how they've rebuilt this arsenal? Of course, the money, who loans them the money to get this stuff? Who turns a blind eye while they build up a nuclear and modern technologically advanced arsenal to rival the only other one on the planet? So I just think that all plays into an obvious context in which these strings are being pulled. That couldn't happen. Here's an article from the Business Insider on March 4th. It's unprecedented. We've never seen this before, is a quote. How ISIS makes and supplies deadly IEDs, which are improvised explosive devices. The terror group, which holds large swaths of territory in both Iraq and Syria, despite being pressured from nearly all sides, has turned to the use of IEDs as a major force multiplier. It's unprecedented. We have never seen this before. It's in the thousands and thousands. It's not just a few roadside bombs. There are literally fields of them. Previously in Iraq, we could go after the lone bomb maker using captured biometrics off an IED and try to link events together from that. But now we face IED factories on an industrial scale with significant supply chains and funding lines. So not much you can do. Again, it's like what I talked about last week. They're getting the material from the phones, and we're being told that somehow they've developed an industrial scale ability to make these improvised explosive devices. So I don't think they're telling us all that for nothing. I mean, it keeps us scared in the moment, which is always a satisfying perspective from the end of the propaganda. If everyone's in fear, then psychologically we'll listen to even these crooks and liars tell us what to do if we think they're keeping us safe. That's why they have to keep us in fear no matter what. So, but I say it's also a secondary, it's laying the foundation that when things go off, don't you remember, these guys got thousands of these improvised explosive devices. Okay. The Philippines, I was saying last week, it's funny how sometimes it's like on cue. I point out the lack of journalism or lack of obvious reaction, and then we see it in the following weeks. Yeah, the UN's put sanctions on North Korea. See, they're getting tough on them. So I find it really interesting, the articles about it. But this one just shows that even in the Philippines, this was the first vessel some hours after the UN put sanctions, and a vessel coming from, I think, Indonesia it was, full of palm kernel, pulls into the Philippines, and they confiscate the vessel and deport the crew back to North Korea in accordance with the UN sanctions. And of course, North Korea, in the world of large tankers, they show a picture of it here. This is not a large one, and it's full of palm kernels. It's not like they're delivering gold or weapons or something. So, poor North Korea not getting its shipment of palm kernels, but that's okay, because we find out in another article that they're all about building a nuclear arsenal to go after America. They don't seem to be worried about anybody, and I can't help after reading this week but see them as, like I said last week, a character actor like Kramer coming onto the scene in a dramatic and loud fashion, so that you can't miss him. Now you got to expect something from him. Why does this character show up with all this drama and all this noise? Now it keeps our eye on that character. What's going to happen here? In response to the UN's move, Pyongyang fired 6 short-range missiles into the sea on Thursday when North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordered its nuclear arsenal put on standby for preemptive use at any time. Right? Kim also warned that the situation on the divided Korean peninsula had become so dangerous that the North needed to shift its military strategy to one of preemptive attack. Washington downplayed Kim's threat as posturing. And then it says, we have not seen North Korea test or demonstrate the ability to miniaturize a nuclear weapon and put it on an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, a U.S. defense official told AFP. Still, the official added, our forces are ready to counter-eliminate strikes if necessary, which is what I've been saying. I don't think we're so worried about North Korea, but we want the world to be scared. We want this to be a big deal, and I'm seeing it more, Dad. These players are all being moved because ultimately, their numbers being called, they probably are being threatened. North Korea probably knows that there's some threat, and it's trying to posture in response. It's not simply being handed a script to play a role that's not in its best interest, is what I want to make clear. Sometimes it sounds like I'm presenting that these powers that be are pulling the strings in that way, but I see it as much deeper. Remember, I'm picturing it goes back 100 years or more, and it's all done through money and funding, and the people that are in power all get their money from the same source. And that source is able, like Rothschild said, give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. Right? I don't care if the guy that's making the laws doesn't like me. He's still going to do what I say because I'm the source of his power. His power is based on money and guns. I got the money and I make the guns. That's the way I see it nowadays. And in that way, all their strings are pulled. So anyway, North Korea is talking about preemptive strike. That's interesting for a country that's testing nuclear weapons and afraid that they're going to need a preemptive strike. Okay, so I think this may be where I can break into the history lesson today, because I think this is what got me going down that road. This is a Christian Science Monitor article from March 4th titled, What's the Model for Change in Iranian Politics? Be patient, seems to be the rhetorical answer. What's the model for change in Iranian politics? Be patient. And it goes on to point out, and this is the part that's so interesting to me, President Rouhani hoping to boost the president's agenda of greater outreach to the West and looser social restrictions at home. Like many of those who turned out to vote for Mr. Rouhani's camp and against the hardliners' grip on power, he had high hopes. During these years of Rouhani, lots of things have changed and lots toward reform. God willing, if pro-Rouhani candidates come to Parliament, progress will happen. But then it's interesting how we looked at, they sort of mentioned this in here. While Rouhani now has a revitalized mandate and faces a less hostile Parliament, hardline elements that fear any opening and have successfully blocked such change for nearly 2 decades, still hold many cards. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, makes all final decisions on affairs of state and is backed by a conservative, deep state apparatus that includes the deep-pocketed Islamic Revolutionary Guard, parallel foreign policy in conflict zones like Syria and Iraq. Right? Starting to see the connection here, guys? To prevail with his agenda, analysts say Rouhani will have to continue a middle path, making gradual adjustments that may anger his reformist supporters, yet may succeed where previous reform-minded leaders failed to make change stick. Alongside electing a new parliament, Iranians also voted in a new assembly of experts, the clerical body that will choose the next supreme leader. Iran's key revolutionary leaders are in their 70s and 80s, adding a critical dimension to the country's future path. See, so all of this is coming, and there's other articles this week, I think, also on Iran's their motivation right now. But what I find interesting is this political process that seems to be based on the West political process. And so I got asking, when did that? When did they start using a parliament? Why does the supreme leader who makes all final decisions decide that, let's do a parliamentary system like our friends America and England and Canada and Australia? Those devils that we call devils. Let's let our system reflect their system. When did that happen? So let's do a little history lesson and find out when that. So I went to, what can only be described as the modern history book, Wikipedia. That's where the people in power are writing, the winners are writing the history for us to believe. So let's see where they say how this happened. So let's get a little history on Iran, also known as Persia, officially the Islamic Republic of Iran. Is a sovereign state in Western Asia. It is bordered to the northwest by Armenia, the de facto Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, and Azerbaijan, to the north by Kazakhstan and Russia, across the Caspian Sea, to the northeast by Turkmenistan, to the east by Afghanistan and Pakistan. See why all these places become important, huh, in this bigger picture? Pakistan, Afghanistan, Russia, they're all surrounding Persia. To the south by the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, and to the west by Turkey and Iraq. It's the only country that both the Caspian Sea and Indian Ocean coastline. Iran has long been geostrategic importance because of its central location in Eurasia and Western Asia and its proximity to the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is home to one of the world's oldest civilizations, beginning with the formation of the Proto-Elamite and Elamite kingdoms in 3200 to 2800 BC. The Iranian Medes unified the area in the first of many empires in 625 BC, after which it became the dominant culture and political power in the region. Iran reached the pinnacle of its power during the Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great in 550 BC, which at its greatest extent comprised major portions of the ancient world, stretching from parts of the Balkans and Eastern Europe proper in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, making it the largest empire the world had yet seen. The empire collapsed in 330 BC following the conquest of Alexander the Great. The Parthian Empire emerged from the ashes and was succeeded by the Sassanid dynasty in 224, under which Iran again became one of the leading powers in the world, along with the Roman Byzantine Empire, for a period of more than 4 centuries. In 633 AD, Rashidun Muslims invaded Iran and conquered it by 651, largely replacing the indigenous faiths of Manichaeism and Zoroastrianism. Iran became a major contributor to the Islamic Golden Age, producing many influential scientists, scholars, artists, and thinkers. Establishment of the Safavid dynasty in 1501, which prompted Twelver Shia Islam as the official religion, marked one of the most important turning points in Iranian and Muslim history. Starting in 1736 under Nader Shah, Iran reached its greatest territorial extent since the Sassanid Empire, briefly possessing what was arguably the most powerful empire at the time. During the 19th century, Iran irrevocably lost swaths of its territories in the Caucasus, which made part of the concept of Iran for centuries, to neighboring Imperial Russia. Right? During the 19th century, now we're getting close. This is why I'm bringing, we're getting into the modern conflicts. Popular unrest culminated in the Persian Constitutional Revolution of 1906, which established a constitutional monarchy in the country's first parliament. There it is. 1906. Hey, what was going on at that time, Dad? Yeah, we're looking at 10, 15 years or so after this supposed letter by Albert Pike, 3 World Wars. We're just less than 10 years from the opening of the First World War. Very interesting to me that at this moment, now you're talking about extreme influence by this time of the the banks that took over banking through the Bank of England in the 1600s in the 17th century. A couple hundred years later, who's got all the money? Popular unrest culminated in the Persian constitutional revolution. Well, shoot, popular unrest, that's what culminated in the communist, the Bolshevik revolution, didn't it? I mean, isn't that how people with money do it? They go and fund the people that are not happy with the current establishment, because otherwise, see, normally the current establishment is powerful enough to put down popular uprisings. See, and when they do, their empire lasts. And where's the popular uprising that can take them out? They need funding. And that's where you get your modern world. Everything from the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Civil War, all funded. Otherwise, it couldn't have been such big battles. The establishment can put down people with pitchforks and shovels normally. That's why the Mexican Revolution was such a big deal. These people threw France out just because they didn't like them here. France just didn't have the wherewithal at the time to put that much money into keeping Mexico. Of course, that I'm sure had to do with other influences, since Mexico hasn't been able to escape the grip of America. So anyway, a popular unrest culminated in this 1906 constitutional monarchy in the country's first parliament, following a coup d'etat instigated by the UK and the US in 1953. 1953, Dad. A coup d'etat instigated by the UK and the US. So you think we're not pulling any strings in Iran. They're just doing whatever they want. First, they got, right about the same time the whole world is about to be sort of restructured for World War I, or during World War I, we got them being a popular unrest, culminating in a parliamentary system. Then by 53, we've got a coup d'etat instigated by the UK and US. Iran gradually became close allies with the United States and the rest of the West, remained secular but grew increasingly autocratic. Growing dissent against foreign influence and political repression culminated in the 79 revolution, which led to the establishment of an Islamic Republic. Tehran is the country's capital and largest city, as well as its leading cultural and economic center. Iran is a major regional and Middle East power, exerting considerable influence in international energy security and the world economy through its large reserves of fossil fuels, which include the largest natural gas supply in the world and the fourth largest proven oil reserves. Iran's rich cultural legacy is reflected in part by its 19 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, the fourth largest number in Asia and 12th largest in the world. Iran is a founding member of the UN. Iran is a founding member of the UN, ECO, NAM, OIC, and OPEC. Right? What did OPEC do? It went in to make sure the petrodollar could be established, didn't it? Iran's a founding member. See, their people have never wanted any of this. And so it's this hostility that's been built in from the beginning, Dad, is what I'm saying. Its political system is based on the 1979 Constitution, which combines elements of a parliamentary democracy with a theocracy governed by Islamic jurists under the concept of a supreme leadership. A multicultural country comprising numerous ethnic and linguistic groups. Most inhabitants are officially Shia, and Persian is the official language. See, so interesting. When I read this, I thought, so we combined church and state over there in '79. The very thing we said we wouldn't do, because what a hassle, what a nightmare, what a tangle of conflicting interests that would create. So what did we do? We went and created it for them. They got a supreme leader, so ultimately, what is the political system if a supreme leader can say no? But it does create a constant conflict, like a divide and conquer. You got a parliamentary democracy fighting against a supreme leadership at all times in the country. Okay, so, this is where Iran's system comes from. Looks like the West put it in place, is what I'm getting at. Let's go back to the articles, and I have one more little history lesson if I have time to get to it today. Now this one from ABC News on Saturday. The intel behind whether North Korea even has a nuclear arsenal to put on alert. Yeah, what's the deal? That's what I've been saying, right? Where's the journalism? What are we so scared about? What do they got? Well, now we're going to get it. I mean, if ABC isn't coming out of the horse's mouth, if that's not official propaganda, well, then, you're listening to the wrong channel here for interpretation. Okay, so this article, which I think is important to read a little bit of it, says, is Kim Jong-un's order placing North Korea's nuclear weapons ready for use at a moment's notice to carry out preemptive attacks realistic? Does North Korea even have an arsenal of nuclear weapons? Do North Korea's long-range missile and nuclear tests mean they have the capability to place a small nuclear device on such a missile? North Korea's 4 nuclear tests and long-range missile tests that have placed a satellite into orbit are proof of some of its technical capabilities. But given the opaqueness of the North Korean regime, it's difficult to get clear answers to those questions. What is certain is that North Korea wants to develop those capabilities. Quote, North Korea is committed to developing a long-range nuclear-armed missile that is capable of posing a direct threat to the United States, said the Pentagon's most recent assessment of North Korea's weapons capabilities, released a few weeks ago. As far as I remember, Dad, in this article, no one bothers to ask or answer the question, why would they do that? What's the idea for North Korea to say, okay, now we've got it, guys. We got one. Let's bomb those suckers back into oblivion. I mean, is that the idea there? North Korea, once they get the capability to send one all the way to America, well, naturally, that's the first thing they're going to do, because the result of that will be what? The obliteration of North Korea. So nobody bothers to point any of this out. I don't understand, but I want to go on with what they do tell us. That same report said North Korea's ballistic missile developments and nuclear weapons technology, quote, are in line with North Korea's stated objective of being able to strike the U.S. homeland. How many nuclear weapons does North Korea have? The United States believes that North Korea has the capability to develop nuclear weapons, as shown by its 4 nuclear tests since 2006. However, it is difficult to pinpoint whether they have actually built a small arsenal of rudimentary nuclear weapons or have just built individual nuclear devices that are used for testing their technology. U.S. intelligence has been vague in characterizing whether North Korea has nuclear weapons or not. What is known is that given their nuclear efforts with plutonium and uranium in the past decade, they've produced enough nuclear fuel to build some nuclear devices, but estimates vary among think tanks as to how many weapons they could build if they wanted to. It's generally estimated in open sources that North Korea has produced between 30 and 40 kilograms of separated plutonium, enough for at least half a dozen nuclear weapons, according to a January 2016 Congressional Research Service report. But other estimates range higher. The Institute for Science and International Security estimated in 2014 that North Korea could build 10 to 16 nuclear weapons. The U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies stated in a 2015 report that with continued North Korean nuclear production, quote, the stockpile increases from a current low level of 10 weapons to 20 weapons by 2020. But the think tank estimated that potentially 100 weapons could be developed if North Korea ramped up its nuclear fuel production to maximum capacity. Of course, again, none of this. Why would the world allow them to do that? Since we have a UN, right? China's a permanent UN member, right? All these permanent members, this UN. Why would we allow North Korea to drag the world into a nuclear conflict? If that, why isn't someone sitting down with North Korea about the idea that, wait a minute, you got to change your tune here, or we don't let you have this capability at all, just like Iran. Iran says they want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, right? So, well, we can't let them have a nuclear weapon. But you guys are threatening the U.S., but okay, we're just going to talk about how many have they got, how long is it going to take them. Can North Korea place a small nuclear weapon on an ICBM? As part of its commitment to threaten the United States with an intercontinental ballistic missile, North Korea has a weapon called the KN-08, a long-range missile that can be launched from mobile platforms that can be hard to detect. The KN-08 is more worrisome to U.S. defense officials than the stationary rocket launches that North Korea has used to conduct what it says are satellite test launches, because it can be hard to detect mobile platforms on short notice. We assess that North Korea has already taken initial steps toward fielding this system, although the system has not been flight tested. In April 2013, an assessment by the Defense Intelligence Agency was made public at a congressional hearing that indicated North Korea might be capable of placing a nuclear weapon small enough to be delivered by a missile. So at least for 3 years now, Dad, we've known that they might be able to. So what's been the result of that? Sanctions for 3 years? Hey, don't you dare. What's this narrative you're talking about attacking the U.S.? I mean, that's, we're going to choke you to death, economically before we're going to let you just progress with that narrative. But no, here we are 3 years later, not till they test a nuclear weapon, not till they show up like Kramer on their scene with a big dramatic flare-up are we talking about the fact of nuclear weapons. So that was basically the end of the article. The DIA assesses with moderate confidence that the North currently has nuclear weapons capable of delivery by ballistic missiles. However, the reliability will be low. So again, it's just all, they seem to have it. We don't know quite what they can do. We're a little concerned because they seem to have this mobile weapon that's even harder for us to detect. But again, we're just let's roll with it. Let's see if they actually launch one at us. Then we'll know they've got it and we can respond. And right, is this why we have the United Nations? It's just too much for me to keep. Why isn't anyone asking these questions? And just as I prompted last week, Dad, if you remember these 100 factions, 97 factions of Syrian, moderate Syrian opposition. Who are we backing over there and why? Well, I guess now it's almost as if these things have been in their line to come out when the question becomes too hard not to ask, right? Because here we are from Saturday, Syrian opposition group elects new leader. Now we're going to get an idea who this guy is. The Turkey-based Syrian National Coalition, said longtime member Anas Al-Abda was elected president, replacing Khaled Koja. It added that 3 other officials from the group have been named vice presidents. The coalition was once the main Western-backed opposition group. It is currently part of the Saudi-backed High Negotiations Committee, which was to represent the opposition in indirect peace talks with the Syrian government next week in Geneva. So right there, Dad, right, that should give us some indication there. They're currently part of the Saudi-backed. Okay, so this is who we're going with. This radical Wahhabi Islam, these nutballs that were put in there 100 years ago to upset the Hashemite stability of the region and the Hashemite power base of being the religious leader after the Ottomans fell. What's to stop the Hashemites from becoming a caliph on their own even after we steal all their land? Well, we established the Kingdom of Saud, these radical nutballs. So of course it's them that's slaughtering the people in Yemen. It's them that's backing these, ISIS and everybody else, all the radicals. And so naturally, the people they're backing, that's who we want to take over for Assad. Oh, okay. Well, I feel so much better now to know that this Turkey-based Syrian National Coalition that Saudi Arabia backs, the people we have been backing, that Russia's been shooting and killing. These are the people that we're anxious now to take over the government. I feel so much better now. So, and this to me is connected with this other article, if this is the one. This one. Assad must go at start of Syria transition, says Saudi. The guy who's been in all the news. They're using this one guy, this mouthpiece, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Adel al-Jubeir, to say that, nah, man, he can't. I'll quote him. Assad has to leave at the beginning of the process, said the Saudi minister whose country backs the Syrian opposition. Referring to the sequence of events, he said there is a transitional body, power shifts from Assad to the transitional body, and then he goes. After that, the transitional body drafts a constitution, prepares for elections, because that's how we Arabs like to do it, just like you Americans. Some are arguing that no, Bashar leaves at the elections in 18 months. That's not how we think. For us, it is very clear. He leaves at the beginning of the process, not the end. Okay, so this is Saudi's position right now. And as we talked about last week, they're the ones that are hosting 350,000 coalition of Sunni forces and pledging, hey, we're ready to go. As soon as the U.S. says these talks have failed, which it already, even in this article, this guy they've just elected said that, they're not going. Discussing Syrian opposition reluctance to travel to Geneva to resume peace talks, he admitted that they can't go into talks empty-handed. Syria's main opposition leader said Friday that conditions were not yet right for talks to resume, stressing shortfalls in humanitarian aid and breaches of the ceasefire. So already they're not talking, because they're not, that's kind of what I predicted, I think, a couple of weeks ago. This ceasefire thing, it doesn't make any sense except as a distraction, except as some play that they're making on a level that we're not being told. It's certainly not to stop the killing. But, the Saudi Arabia connection, right? Assad's got to go before the transitions, what this guy's pointing out to us, not stay for 18 months. And I say that's all got to do with what I've been pointing out, Dad, that it ties into the American presidential election. I say Assad's going to be uprooted in the next 2 or 3 months, simply because it's got to be in time for it to be the focal point of the American presidential election, which they know it will be. That's how they're going to get that's how they're going to use this issue to be the key issue, to be the thing that takes up all the time in the media, what to do now about Syria. And it's 18 months before they're this transitional body, right? So we got a year and a half before they hold elections. What's going to go on in that year and a half, I wonder. But what Saudi's saying is it can't be with Assad. So for our eschatological viewpoint, it looks like the uprooting's coming real soon. What I wanted to point out back in the history lesson, the other thing I wanted to find out is, what's going on with Turkey? How do they stretch back this past 100 years? I mean, we know how they do, but I wanted to get a little fuller picture. And I think it's important right now because Turkey's making the play for a renewed caliphate, a renewed Ottoman Empire. And it's not a secret. This is what they're in it for. And as I said last week, I think they're being given the thumbs up. Hey, man, it's your time again. Just like on the other side, the Hashemite king's being told, just hang in there. We're going to make the deal good with you. And it'll be your guns we use to take out these other people. In 324, Constantine I chose Byzantium to be the new capital of the Roman Empire, renaming it New Rome. Following the death of Theodosius I in 395 and the permanent division of the Roman Empire between his two sons, the city, which would popularly become known as Constantinople, became the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. This, which would later be branded by historians as the Byzantine Empire, ruled most of the territory of what is today Turkey until the late Middle Ages, while the other remaining territory remained in Sassanid Persian hands. Right? So I sort of misspoke last week. The Roman Empire, by that point, was sort of divided between these sons of Rome, so to speak, and the Persians. So they've been fighting over this control of this land since the 4th century, anyway. all the way up into what it says the late Middle Ages. Between the 3rd and 7th century, the Byzantines and the neighboring Sassanids frequently clashed over possession of Anatolia, which is Asia Minor, Turkey for the most part, the eastern side of Turkey, which significantly exhausted both empires, thus laying the way open for the eventual Muslim conquests from both empires' respective south. Now, the only history I really know about that, Dad, that's taught to me is that it's the Catholics, it's the Vatican that funded the Muslims to go conquer these people, right? And I don't know how true that is, but now I want to jump forward to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Beylik's first capital was located in Bursa in 1326. Edirne, which was captured in 1361, was the next capital city. After largely expanding to Europe and Anatolia in 1453, the Ottomans nearly completed the conquest of the Byzantine Empire by capturing its capital, Constantinople, during the reign of Mehmed II. Constantinople was made the capital city of the empire following Edirne. The Ottoman Empire would continue to expand into the eastern Anatolia, Central Europe, the Caucasus, North and East Africa, the islands of the Mediterranean, Greater Syria, Mesopotamia, and the Arabian Peninsula in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, right? Which brings us now up against 17th centuries, the banking establishment, right? And I think that the threat, the real threat, look at where these guys were, Dad. Look how big they were by the 17th century. The Ottoman Empire's power and prestige peaked in the 16th and 17th century, particularly during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. The empire was often at odds with the Holy Roman Empire in its steady advance towards Central Europe through the Balkans and the southern part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In addition, the Ottomans were often at war with Persia over territorial disputes. At sea, I mean, what are we looking at? Wait a minute, what did that just say? That for 300 years now, basically, these people that occupy that land, called the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey as its seat of that empire, have been at war both with Western Russia, let's say, Western Europe, Holy Roman Empire, on that side, and Persia, the Iranians on the other side. So this is not something that just started. This is disputed territory forever. You see why it's so easy to draw them into a Third World War if you're looking at it that way from 100 years ago, Dad? At sea, the empire contended with the Holy Leagues, composed of Habsburg Spain, the Republic of Venice, and the Knights of St. John for control of the Mediterranean. Okay, now there's your secret societies. There's your people that essentially run the banks for the European powers, the Habsburgs. It's the seat of, from what I've learned, of these modern secret societies, these powers that come out of Europe. That's why they have a chip in the game. They've been running Europe since this sort of time. In the Indian Ocean, the Ottoman Navy frequently confronted Portuguese fleets in order to defend its traditional monopoly over the maritime trade routes between East Asia and Western Europe. These routes faced new competition with the Portuguese when new competition with the Portuguese discovery of the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. Right? So you see with this trade routes, natural gas in Persia, all these things that have never stopped being pertinent to the empires that sit on that land. Okay, so now let's bring it forward. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 marked the beginning of the Ottoman decline. Now, again, I got to point out that's just 30 years or so after the establishment of the banking system through the Bank of England, which appears to have been funded by the Vatican banks, loaning money to the Rothschilds to set up this banking system. And it happens shortly thereafter to mark the beginning of the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Some territories were lost by the treaty. Austria received all of Hungary and Transylvania except the Banat. Venice obtained most of Dalmatia, along with the Morea, the Peloponnesian Peninsula in southern Greece. Poland recovered Podolia. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the Ottoman Empire continued losing its territories, including Greece, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and the Balkans in the 1912-13 Balkans War. Wow, now we're right up against World War I. Which to me seems to be really, Dad, the more I look at all this now, what was World War I really fought with? Hey, we got to get rid of that Arab power. This Ottoman Empire power, that's the real threat for the future. These guys are way too strong. So what do? Well, let's promise Russia Constantinople from the north. Let's promise the Hashemites Syria and an Arab caliph from the south. Right? Let's get these other Balkans countries involved in a war with them from the east. All at the same time, right? Anatolia remained multi-ethnic until the early 20th century. Its inhabitants were varied ethnicities, including Turks, Armenians, Kurds, Greeks, French, and Italians. Faced with territorial losses on all sides, the Ottoman Empire forged an alliance with Germany, who supported it with troops and equipment. The Ottoman Empire entered World War I, 1914 to 1918, on the side of the Central Powers and was ultimately defeated. See, they were forced to side with Germany, right? They were being attacked from every angle. Everybody was turning against them. Russia's coming now from the north. The Balkans from the east, the Hashemites from the south, England, I suppose, from the west, Western European allies. How to get America, how to get the big guns involved, how to turn this into World War I. Get these guys into a position where there's nothing they can do but side with Germany, get bigger guns involved, more guns. During the war, major atrocities were committed by the Ottoman government against the Armenians, Assyrians, and Pontic Greeks. Following World War I, the huge conglomeration of territories and peoples that formerly comprised the Ottoman Empire was divided into several new states. On October 30th, 1918, the Armistice of Mudros was signed, followed by the imposition of Treaty of Sèvres on August 10th, 1920 by Allied powers, which was never ratified. The Treaty of Sèvres would break up the Ottoman Empire and force large concessions on territories of the empire in favor of Greece, Italy, Britain, and France. You think there's a reason Greece is in the mix today? Okay. I'm going to leave it at there. The Republic of Turkey, I kind of wanted to go through that, but maybe I'll encourage people to read that about how they got there in the 20s, forming their Republic of Turkey, moving the capital to Ankara, and one of the radical reforms was this parliamentary system of government. So tell me who was behind these people. Joined NATO in 52. Okay, so I'm just trying to paint that picture of go back into the history, see what these players, they're not just on our American stage like a movie, to be there, bad cop against the good cop storyline. That's the way we play it in the paper. But look at the history. Look at where these people come from. Look at the land that's in dispute, the issues that are in dispute, and the people that it's in dispute with. Now let's go back to the articles. Turkey needs to stop or significantly cut migrant flow, says a UE envoy, March 4th. Turkey needs to stop or significantly reduce number of illegal migrants crossing into Europe, and a readmission agreement between Ankara and Brussels must go into full effect on June 1st. A very important date will be the 1st of June, when all provisions of the Turkey-EU readmission agreement will have to apply and be fulfilled. In the meantime, it's important to improve the application of the existing bilateral readmission agreement with Greece and Bulgaria. Then Turkey needs to stop, or very, very significantly reduce the irregular departures of refugees and migrants from its Aegean coastline to Greek islands. Greek, funny enough, huh? People they've been at war with for 100 years. And an EU official said Brussels and European governments were counting on Turkey substantially reducing the numbers of people reaching Greek islands within days, and that those who did take to boats could now be deported and accepted back by Turkey under an existing return agreement between Athens and Ankara. Right? Europe's been pushing all this time. I'm starting to see the deeper play part of it with the refugees, Dad. Turkey is shoving them into Europe, saying, "Hey, man, I need my help. I want my assurances. I want you backing me on this play for Syria, this play for territory. Otherwise, I'll send these guys to you. You're creating this over there, and you're not going to give it to me. You're just going to give me the bill. Take care of all these refugees. Don't worry about it." So he's sending them to Greece, and now Europe's had to finally get to the point where they can say, "But we can send them back. You have to do something about this." And now here's the other side of that in another article. EU pressured to take stance over Turkish media right erosion. No, I'm sorry. This is a very important article. This isn't the one I was looking for. I wanted Germany, France push for joint EU solution to migrant crisis, out of the Associated Press on March 4th. Independent national measures to tackle the migrant crisis are counterproductive, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Friday as she met with her French counterpart in Paris. Border slowdowns and closures along the migrant route through Europe have just meant that people are now piling up in Greece, overwhelming the country's resources. The two leaders met ahead of a summit of EU and Turkish leaders to discuss the migrant crisis Monday. The Balkan countries and Austria have recently introduced tight restrictions to stem the flow of migrants. That has resulted in thousands of refugees and other migrants being stranded by Greece's border with Macedonia. Unilateral solutions do not help us, Merkel said. Germany and France agree that the U.S. has to protect its external border to preserve freedom within Europe, yet away from internal border controls and for security reasons. Holland said France will provide a ship to the NATO force deployed in the Aegean Sea between Turkey and Greece to help Europe's external border control. As temporary controls between several member states are reimposed to deal with the migrant crisis, some fear a full collapse of the borderless Schengen zone through most of the EU. The EU's head office, the European Commission, has estimated that the cost of fully restoring border controls between EU member states would be as high as 18 billion euros a year. You see with this migrant crisis, the pressure it's putting on Europe? This is what I'm trying to read now, Dad, since they're not blaming these migrants for terrorism, are they? Because otherwise they'd have to stop it. So maybe maybe that's going to come later, but at this point, what it appears to be is pressure on Europe. They're threatening or they're creating the dissolution of the European Union because they're going to have to protect their borders individually, each of them as a sovereign country. They're people like in Orban's Hungary are saying, "Hey, we don't want any of this," or at least the governments. While others like Germany are saying, "Hey, we got to come together and fix this." So it's creating this sort of divide that could result in the dissolution of the European Union, perhaps. More than 1.2 million people applied for asylum for the first time in the EU last year, more than double the number in 2014. Most of the people applying in the 28 EU countries were Syrian, Iraqi, or Afghan nationals. It said 362,000 Syrians applied. The bloc on Friday kicked off the distribution of the promised 3 billion euros in aid for refugees in Turkey, formally pledging 95 million euros for educational and food assistance. See, so out of the 3.3 billion, less than $1 billion is for education and food, formally. 2 billion, who knows? Probably guns for Turkey. I mean, I don't know, but it's the way I'm reading it, Dad, between the two stories. Turkey saying, I'll shove them out of here. And the EU saying, we'll send boats over there to keep them from coming to Greece. Turkey, you've got to do something about this. See, there's tension here between Turkey and Greece, between Turkey and the EU. All NATO countries, but tension. And I say that's the name of the game these days, wars and rumors of wars. I really believe that's where we're at in the world. Assad must go. We went over that one. Islamic State is losing. Coalition to step up pressure, says a U.S. envoy. This is from Reuters, Dad, on Saturday. Islamic State is losing a battle against forces arrayed against it from many sides in Iraq and Syria, and the focus would turn to stabilizing cities seized back from them. Addressing a press conference in Baghdad, U.S. official Brett McGurk declined to put a timeline on when the group would be defeated or when Mosul and Raqqa, the main cities under its control in Iraq and Syria respectively, would be retaken. We don't know when it's going to happen, but they're on the run. McGurk met in Baghdad Iraqi officials, including Prime Minister Abadi, who said in December that 2016 would be a year of, quote, final victory over the group in Iraq. How does he know? Daesh is feeling pressure now from all simultaneous directions, and that's going to continue. That's going to accelerate, McGurk said. Daesh is losing. As they lose, we focus increasingly on stabilization, referring to plans being made to rehabilitate and police cities recaptured from militants. Rehabilitate, like what? Get them used to the idea that they're no longer Iraq, but going to be a Sunni caliph, Sunni caliphate. Islamic State has come under pressure from air raids and ground forces actions by various parties in both countries, but they still hold large tracts of land. That's the way this 500-word article ends. No journal. What tracts of land? What do they do with those tracts, Dad? Are there oil fields on those tracts? Are there arms depots on those tracts of land, or are there just sheep and rocks? Which tracts of land do they hold? And why does that pose a threat? And to who? And right? It's just I've never seen any of it. And it's funny, at the bottom of this story, I really encourage people to check this out, because this is from Reuters, Saturday. Islamic State is losing. Coalition to step up pressure. And at the bottom of this 500-word article, on the right, there's always the little soundbite blurb headlines with an accompanying picture. And the last one here in this line at the bottom of the article, and it says, a member loyal to the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant waves an ISIL flag in Raqqa, June something 2014, I think it was, almost 2 years ago, a year and a half or more. And it's that picture, Dad, that we first saw claiming that there's, this new black masked, black uniformed, black flagged Islamic State. And so here it is. They're showing the photo again. The first one we saw that I called a year ago and said, wait a minute, hey, hold on. I don't see terrorist organization here. I see photo set up. I see a kid up on the street who's just pulled his bike over to the side and is looking back like he was riding the other way. But he's stopped to look. Hey, what are those guys doing? Getting a picture of this guy. They're on. You can tell it's a clean street. It's a divided street that looks like it almost has 4 lanes. 2 lanes going each way. It's like a big avenue with nice looking buildings that have foliage out front of them. There's nothing destroyed here. Now this is this caption's claiming that this is in Raqqa a year and a half ago. And here they are, and as I told you, the only other thing in the picture looks like an early morning by the lighting. It's all shadow. Everything is in the shade, even the buildings, although the light in the background. It's daytime. So I say it's right after dawn. It's like 7 o'clock in the morning. And there's a white minivan going the other way in the middle of the street, as if they just dropped the photographer and the actor off, and they're continuing down the far side of the street, going to hit the corner, turn around, come and pick these guys up after they got the picture of the deadly Islamic State. So they're showing that, a member loyal to the Islamic State, and this lone person walking at sunrise carrying a banner. For who? The kid? The car that's behind him going by? There's no one else on the street. Who's he advertising to? Just walking down the street, 7 o'clock in the morning, banner over his head. That's how absurd this is. But anyway, they show that photo again because I refer to it a lot, Dad. That's why I'm bringing it up. If anyone wants to see that photo, there it is. Okay, another article here. EU pressured to take stance over Turkish meteorite erosion. Now, I think this is a big one. The European Union's facing increasing pressure to speak out against the erosion of media freedom in Turkey following the takeover of the country's largest circulation newspaper. But few expect it to take a bold stance toward Ankara while trying to assure its help in dealing with the migration crisis. Isn't that funny? So Europe's saying, well, I guess it's okay if you perform what we talk about in our narrative as sort of Soviet-era takeover, right? The state takeover of the largest press in the country. I mean, we're going to, as the West, we're just going to keep supporting you, Turkey. You're our buddy. Wait a minute, that's really borderline crossing the line, isn't it? But it says few expect it to take a bold stance toward Ankara while trying to assure its help in dealing with the migration crisis. Huh, Dad? Oh boy, he'll shove those 2 million people into Europe if we don't let him make his power play. Anybody else seeing that? Police used tear gas and water cannons for a second day running on Saturday to disperse hundreds of protesters who gathered outside the headquarters of Zaman newspaper, now surrounded by police fences. Law enforcement officers stormed the building on Friday to enforce the court-ordered seizure of the publication, which is linked to President Erdogan's top foe, U.S.-based opposition cleric, Fethullah Gulen. Right? So all of a sudden, with whatever's happening in the world, over there, Erdogan and his party and whatever's going on in Turkey, his top opposition, this cleric, Fethullah Gulen, they're not going to let him tell anybody anymore. Right? That's what it sounds like to me. Unless you think, oh, all these places are already controlled. I want to ask you, how many times you heard in America the last time it took the police tear gas to disperse a crowd of American protesters because our rights and freedoms have been sacrificed, now that we know we're under the control of 6 multinational corporations that control all of our news. The fact that we know we're under the control of the lobbying industry that essentially tells our government for us how to, what laws to pass, writes them in most cases. When do you see Americans protesting for 2 straight days and have to be run away by tear gas and water cannons? Right? See, that happened for us. It happened in the 60s and 70s. It kind of took them 20 years to finally shut Americans up and turn us into the benign, brainwashed, sort of plugged in the matrix, thinking we're so good, thinking we're so effective in our voting, in our activism. Oh, we have freedom of speech in America. Yeah, you just don't get any of it in our news. You can say anything you want theoretically, but God forbid it ever comes out in a newspaper or in a publication anywhere that has an effect on anyone in our country. That'll never happen. And so apparently, perhaps it was still going on in Turkey. It's like the reason Europe, Dad, has so much more protection for its people in the way of a social democracy. The people still get maternity leave. The people still get vacation leave. The people still get a livable wage to buy a home and raise a child, because otherwise they won't go to work. They won't allow a political system that denies them a realistic life. That's why places like Europe, they get out in the streets. Brazil, Mexico, Europe, apparently Turkey, they get out in the street still. And you got to shoot them down with water cannons to take their freedoms away from them. In America, they just simply tell you, here's what we're doing. Yeah, no, you can no longer do this. No, you can't pray in school anymore. No, you can't talk about this or that anymore. Those are, you get thrown out of school if you're heard mentioning something like that. Hey, what about 9/11? Hey, what about what about all of this future we're in right now, and all these wars are based on a lie? Arabs didn't hijack planes. Planes didn't fly into buildings. That's a cartoon. But in American journalism, are we standing anywhere and getting shot with water cannons to insist that we want to be able to continue that narrative in the world? No, not for many, many, many years, decades. But apparently in Turkey, there was an opposition cleric that was able to perhaps say some things. And he's not going to be able to say that anymore. His Zamar paper, the protesters chanted, quote, "Free press cannot be silenced, and Zaman cannot be silenced," as riot police used shields and fired tear gas to push back the crowd, sending demonstrators running into side streets for protection. Right? This is all because one of their papers that they feel is free press, somebody that they trust telling them the dirt on a Drogon. Now, I'm not saying that's not all set up opposition like it is in America. I'm saying at least the people still imagine that opposition is something that they're entitled to, and they're ready to go out and be shot by tear gas for 2 days to try and stop this incursion into their rights. So, the Istanbul court's appointment of trustees to manage Zaman and its sister outlets further reduced the number of opposition media organizations in Turkey, which is dominated by pro-government news outlets. So, just something interesting going on. Turkey right now, I can't ignore it. I mean, I'm starting to see it all as this is the guy making his play 100 years later for the Ottoman Empire. He's being told it's your turn now to be the power in that region. And so one of those things he's doing is using that power. He's threatening Europe with the refugees so he can get his way, closing down press. I mean, this is a NATO ally. This is our friend Turkey, acting like Saudi Arabia. Okay. The last thing I have this week, Dad, is something from, I don't know, just says Oliver Knox, chief Washington correspondent. I don't know what rag this comes out of. Pressure mounts on Obama to call Islamic State attacks on Christians genocide. So that shows a picture of Iraqi Christians who fled the violence in Mosul after Islamic State militants took control of the area, carry a wooden cross on Friday. So it's got this picture of quite a group, more than any ISIS I've ever seen. I mean, this is a group of what looks like hundreds of people in some demonstration. Looks totally peaceful, but it's hundreds of people. Never seen that many ISIS combatants or Syrian forces or anybody. I've never seen a picture of 500 men on a battlefield, and you'd think some press agency would like to get that photo, wouldn't you? So I don't know who came in and started slaughtering all the Christians of Mosul, because that's been going on some time now. And then we're just now arguing, does it qualify as genocide? Would that have really mattered if we meant to stop it? Couldn't we have sent some SEAL teams in there? Couldn't we have, amassed some special forces and been fighting back against this? But I find it really telling that they're arguing over whether it's genocide. They're pointing out that these guys, this Islamic State, has openly declared plans to exterminate the Yazidi, a northern Iraqi religious minority of about 500,000. They've said, we're getting rid of them, right? But they haven't really said that about Christians. They're killing them, but they haven't said we're going to kill all Christians. And then they show this picture that says displaced people from the minority Yazidi sect fleeing violence from forces loyal to the Islamic State. And, the picture is on a woman carrying her child with a couple of children walking next to her. Behind her looks like into the distance of a few hundred yards, some dozens of people, not a lot. So wherever this violence was, it certainly wasn't hitting a big city. Some little town, perhaps. And what I found so interesting in this picture, like so many of them, they must not be fleeing far because they look like they're walking across a very barren landscape. No shade, no water. But not a one of them's carrying a bottle of water or any container. Nobody. They're carrying their kids, a couple of them. You can see little kids up on the shoulders or being held, and the other kids walking along. Again, not very many people, and how far could they be going with their kids? Nobody's carrying a bottle of water. Where are they heading? And it makes me think when they show a picture like this and they start this talk about genocide. Dad, you recall seeing anything about Darfur, right, in Africa? You remember I've been bringing this up for years since I finally was made aware of what's almost a completely ignored subject. I mean, it just doesn't, American media, they don't talk about the fact that millions with an M, millions of Darfurians, Christians, as it turns out, genocidally, systematically being slaughtered for no other reason than they happen to live on land where there's natural resources. And guess who we're given the guns to systematically destroy them? The Mujahideen, Islamic government that we're friends with. Right? Obviously moderate Islamists that we're friends with. But, I find the other thing in this article that they mention, no journalism, Dad, about the orthodox Islamic position that I've heard so much about now that I bothered to look concerning Christians and Jesus. Why is it this sect of Islam is so against Christianity? When did that happen? I mean, it hasn't happened for 1,000 years of these people all living side by side. When did Islam finally decide that Christians had to be? Where did this thought come from? Why is this such a unique vision created by this Islamic State, which has so many mysterious origins, as in mercenary army and not Islamic at all? Right? How come that's not pointed out? How come the argument that Obama is so aware of doesn't point out that, why are these guys so against Christians? They're all waiting for Jesus to return as the sign of all signs of the end, and that their Mahdi is going to emerge or re-emerge, depending if you're a Shia or a Sunni. Why is that? You're telling me I'm the only person that finds this of relevance to this storyline? That at least it should be answered for? Hey, where are the ones that are arguing that we're not against Christians and never have been? How come their voice isn't being expressed through this journalism? The denouncement of ISIS as a mercenary army like Sheikh Imran Hussein does. The denouncement of these people that are being called, Christian killers as not being Muslim at all, that this whole movement's got nothing to do with Islam, that Islam's waiting for Jesus to return along with the Christians. How come that's not brought up at all, Dad? I think that's very important, actually, in us asking the questions to read between the lines. Why are they telling us that there's a genocide of Christians when they didn't bother doing anything about the genocide of Christians in Africa at the hands of Islamists? And never does the point of contention that who are these Islamists that aren't friends with Christians? Why have the rest of Muslims been okay with Christians for, millennia? A millennia at least. Why is that not asked or questioned? And it can only be because the answers lead to seeing things clearly, which is why I'm hoping that by asking those questions, we might start to see things more clearly. Anyway, Dad, that's what I've got for you this week. Thanks for having me on the show. Talk to you next week.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right. And it was another superb analysis of this week's happenings in the news in the Middle East. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube. And comment, drop us a line, subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.